Here we are on a TGI Friday awaiting the arrival of Hurricane Gustav in the Gulf of Mexico. So that will date this introduction to a video on still life painting. Here I am some actual months from the finish of the still life, and I've switched subject matter already. But if I can describe the advantage of still life painting, it is the most controllable type of subject matter, and it really is something that you will notice when you look at especially young artists. They are able to do with some skill, because it seems to be the most cooperative type of subject matter you can really use as a beginning artist. So it's a really nice thing to get into, and it doesn't bite back. You know, you have some control. Sometimes you don't get models that are very cooperative and show up on time, and those kinds of things are difficult. And the landscape has some difficulties. I'm not painting from life, obviously, on a canvas this big. If I were painting from life, I could actually paint myself on a little cliff with an easel in front of me and so forth. There are artists who actually, and I have done this before, I've actually gone out and painted on location and then come back in and painted a much larger picture. But that would be impossible with a canvas this big. So, still life. It's a wonderful thing to paint, and I've probably painted more still life than any other kind of subject matter in my career. So with that, we will show you on all the secrets on how to paint a good still life. Thank you for your time. Well, we're about to begin a still life painting. This is a variation, of course, in subject matter after we've done the portrait. I want to introduce you to my palette and some of the brushes that I'll be using, so that you're familiar with the materials. Really, we just use a couple of types of brushes. These are filbert brushes. This is my favorite kind of brush. They're a long hog bristle that's rounded on the end. A bright brush would be one that is cut off on a straight line. I never use those. A long flat bristle is a great brush to use, and they wear to this rounded shape, which is really the preferable shape in my opinion. Because brushes, obviously the shape of brushes have different names. This is a filbert, of course. The bright's cut off, the flat is cut off with a flat end. And the round brushes, now the purpose, a flat gives a kind of a choppy brush stroke, as does the bright. The round brushes, when you place them on the palette or on the canvas, the bristles will spread, and the round brushes give you the least track on the canvas and on the palette. And so this is sort of a compromise here with the rounded end. So you have a little painterly quality without the constant choppy brush stroke. And I use a variety of these sable brushes. This is a sable round, probably the one that I use the most for detail. This is a number 2 flat sable. This is a Kolinsky red sable, Rhenish Utrecht. That's the brand that I've got here. And I use a variety of brands here. This is a Dick Blick Masterstroke, frankly. To me, it's not all that important. The hog bristle, and I do need to really renew some of my brushes. Lots of those are at the point where I can give them away to students. But these are about the variety of brushes that I'll be using in this painting. Let's introduce you to some of the colors down on the palette or the painting. The bristles actually spread a little bit, and it will leave the least track when you're painting, and that's so that you know from a flat to a round, one gives a harsher, more painterly track, I suppose. And if you're doing something extremely polished, then you use the round brushes. Now these academicians will use a lot of very round brushes. So Let's introduce you to some of the colors. First of all, my white is Permalba white by Weber Company. It's a combination of both zinc and titanium white, which gives you probably the most balanced white color, and it's a little bit softer. I like that texture of paint better. Of course, the titanium white is a little warmer. The zinc is a little cooler in color, so I like that combination. I'll get some fresh white out here eventually. I won't need that until we get, I won't need any fresh white until we get the canvas covered. We'll be using mostly earth colors and some reds in this particular painting that I'll be painting. So the siennas and the ochres, and this is yellow ochre, this is raw sienna, this is burnt sienna, this is burnt umber. All of those colors are actually earth colors mixed with the binder, which in the case of oil painting is linseed oil. So all you have in paints are the pigment and the binder, which is linseed oil. And then, of course, you'll use a solvent. The solvent I used terpenoid as a solvent. It seems to be the best cutting quality and the least smelly. I used to use a big container with turpentine, but you really want to keep the caustic liquids down to a minimum. I know that some artists actually use a variety of oils or things that don't affect the artist so much. You lose the least amount of brain cells from sniffing the oils and so forth. So the reds that I'll be using, of course, alizarin crimson. I've got two colors of cad orange. Now, obviously, it just depends on the brand that you buy. These are both labeled cadmium orange, but I think one's a Liquitex color and the other one is now Liquitex is really, I don't think they make oil paints anymore, but so you'll find that there is a variety of colors. And I like to use about 3 or 4 different cadmium colors. This is a cad medium color, and this is a cadmium pale yellow, or cadmium light yellow. I've got ultramarine blue over here in the left-hand corner that I will be using. And then I've got a cerulean blue. I'll likely use a little bit of that. And this is actually a phthalo green, which is just a darker version of Viridian. That's actually Viridian right there. It's probably not even very wet enough to use. That I think is permanent green light, which I sometimes use in portraits. I don't use that in landscapes. And I doubt that I'll be using it in any of the greens in this setup. Obviously, the colors that I will be using in still life are a little bit reduced compared to what I would use in portrait painting. I use a variety of reds in portrait painting and some pre-mixed flesh tone colors that are there, but we don't even need to mention those at the moment. But let's turn our attention now to the canvas. And this is a Utrecht medium textured cotton duck canvas, and it has a roughness to it. The plastic is still on at this moment, and what you see here is actually a block-in on top of the plastic, and I did that as a demonstration for one of my students as to how to separate the space. And as I attack this canvas, or as I begin to work on it, you'll see me first of all just divide up the spaces on the composition to begin with. Now, when you block in a canvas or a portrait or a landscape or anything else that you're working on, the reason you do a block in is just to gain control of the composition. The student will very often start in detail and then not be really aware of how it's going to cover the canvas, and so they don't have really the composition in mind. I've got a couple of pieces of mat board here that I could use actually to frame the composition. I don't normally do this anymore, but I used to do this, and it's a great device if you wanted to just see. You hold this up and you look at the composition through these little framing instruments, so you see exactly how it's going to fit on the composition on the canvas. Some people use little L's and they can paper clip them together to look at how it's going to be framed up. But I already have an idea of how this is going to go on the canvas and what shape it's going to take. So what I'm going to do is just rip this plastic off and get started on the canvas. Now this canvas is really quite a nice canvas, even though it's somewhat heavy. It's really well braced on the back. It's got these little pieces of wood here that go in the corners if you need any stretch on the canvas. But when you buy a canvas, it's really important to try and get a canvas that is pretty well tight on the canvas. So you look at that when you buy a piece of canvas initially, so that you don't have to mess around tightening the canvas. This should be a very good canvas to use, and so we'll get started here in just a moment. And so now I'm ready to block in the composition. What I'm going to use is yellow ochre, because it's really the color that I use the most in painting. So I'm going to get some yellow ochre out here and add a little turpentine to it so that it's sort of a soupy mixture. I can draw quite well with it if it's in a fairly liquid state. All right, now what I want to do to begin with is to figure out approximately how high something is going to be and the position of these major objects to begin with. So I will figure out where they're going to go. Now I knew to begin with approximately what the position of these objects will be. So positioning the jug over there, and I want to get this, I want some space in between. I want these major objects a little shifted to the left. I may pull them a little bit more to the left here. Now I want to get some comparative heights so that I know exactly where things are going to fit in. This big copper jug in the background is going to fit right about from there to there and down. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail yet. We've got this picture that connects the two of these things together. It's just a little bit lower. So I want that sort of positioned here, and I want to sort of position or even to kind of block out the amount of space that's going to take up. Now I can move down here to some of these smaller items. I'm looking at the position of all the stuff that I've already got located. I've got this this gourd back here in the background, and I want at about this level to position this bowl and I look at the position of all these other items that are already there, and I can sort of put in the level that's going to take on the composition. I'm going to come back up here and put in this ellipse. Now, ellipses, you know, when you throw an ellipse, I've done enough of this that it's not all that difficult, but what you want to do with any ellipse is make, if what you've got is sitting on a level surface, the ends of the ellipse will be on a level with each other, and they will have the same amount of curve on the top as they do on the bottom. Now, obviously, if you know perspective, your position in relation to the ellipse will give you the amount of curve. So if something is right on your eye level, it's going to not have any curve in it at all. And so all of these things that are lower will actually curve more. And so actually this will actually be a little bit more open, a little more curve on it as we go lower in this composition. And to begin with, let's see, I can come down here to try and figure out exactly how things are going to be positioned. I'm going to just put in a few lines to make sure I've got the positioning of these objects before I get into too much detail. I'm looking at this onion over here. That's going to be the left-hand limit of my composition. We've located things at this point, and the level of the table will now come in just a few inches above the bottom, at a point where design-wise it will look fairly good in the composition. What I'm going to do now, of course, is to light this thing so that the foreground is more important. I've got a dark background on this, so that gives me the opportunity to sort of highlight all the stuff that's in the foreground and get darker as it goes back into the back. So we will now begin all this drawing in a little more detail. So I've got everything positioned. I've got this piece of copper with some beaten metal on it, which is all going to be quite nice looking when it gets painted. And I enjoy painting reflective objects like copper, and I haven't seen too many people that paint copper like I do. I get a really realistic looking copper usually. So we're going to sort of map out all the little articulation points, the points where things turn, and mark out the divisions and so forth. This is that little shoulder on the metal. And we're going to give some form to this ancient picture that I've got there. We've got the ellipse up here at the top, comes down and then has a slight hip to it. And again, this is another ellipse. Even the swelling there has to be the same on each side. It actually comes out just a little more on each side, and so we have to try and get that even. The handle for this pewter jug fits in about there. It actually comes in and makes a little bit of a intrusion into the body of the pot there. And that's fairly well located. And you can notice the way I'm dragging my brush. When I put it on there and want to draw with it, I'll put it on the side so a little more paint comes off. And we'll get into the curvatures of this very old jug in the back. Now, I like these old beaten up objects to paint. And we want the curve then on the top to be the same on each side. So all these ellipses now, obviously when you're doing a still life that has all this crockery in it, you've got a lot of these elliptical forms, and they're something you have to be careful with, that you're getting it even. Now we've got an ellipse on top, and I actually see into that a little bit. We have the handle now to deal with. I want to get that inside arc where it comes in, makes a little contact into the inside of the jug itself. And the top of it is about even with the spout. I might bring that up just a hair. And then you have this form, a nice curve. And certainly I like those curves. You'll notice when you're doing portraits and all that, the S-curves of the hair and all those kinds of forms are really elegant forms to deal with. And they make the design beautiful as well. I should explain that still life is probably one of the best teachers for painting, because if you're painting from life, still life doesn't move on you, even though onions will sprout and flowers will die and those kinds of things. You've got an opportunity to just put it there. The light stays the same for hours at a time. In this case, as I do this particular still life, and we've got some perishable stuff, and I want to try and get this drawn in so that I can get to that as quickly as possible and actually paint it before it turns color or dies, and it has some beautiful texture the way it is. So we'll get down to this and get some color on here. I've got a bunch of eggs in this particular little bowl. I want to position things. Got a major form right there in the middle, comes down almost to the bottom of that. That ellipse, and then we've got this egg sticking out of this side. I'm going to bring that over just a little bit. And then a couple of eggs that are just peeking up out of the basket. So that's more or less the position. Now when I get to that and begin painting it in detail, we'll show you how to model the form and all that. Now as I get to this bowl full of plums, what I'm looking at is the position in relation to these other objects. That's the edge over here, and as I follow this one down, it comes, I may even have more room over there. It comes about at least the middle on this side, okay? Now let's swing in the position. I may come down just a little bit. Bowl full of plums. Now they have a beautiful color and texture that we'll be dealing with. When I set this up, you can put up all this fall stuff And the color coordination is almost automatic because they're all earth colors, and they all coordinate so beautifully with each other that you can, just throw it out and paint it, and it works so beautifully. Let's see, I'm trying to figure out, I think I may come lower with this bowl, because I want this plum to stand out a little bit more on top. We'll bring these down. Now you'll notice that I'm not drawing in detail. I'm trying to, as quickly as possible, get this in there. I don't want to spend an undue amount of time drawing and positioning things. All I'm trying to do is to get things in the proper location and so forth. And as long as I know how it's going to fit on the composition, then I don't have to worry about all the details later. I'm getting this bread in here now. It's a large loaf of bread. I have to see exactly how high it comes. That means this that big gourd on the left will be a little bit higher. And now I can come down with the edges of the bowl here, and I'll try to figure out exactly how that's going to fit. And I know that some of you will be watching this video and saying, gosh, he does that so easily, makes it look deceptively easy. Well, it is for me. It's just a matter of becoming used to locating things with your eyes, so forth, and measuring distances and levels. What you're always doing is comparing positions with other things, and that's just a matter of practice. It's just a matter of having done it over and over again. And there's no reason why a person who starts to paint can't be really deliberate about his drawing right to begin with. And if you're careful, it becomes sort of an automatic thing to you. You don't have to worry too much about that later on, because it becomes habit in a hurry. And once you do something and do it as perfectly well as you possibly can, it's something that you just sort of ingrain, and you never quite go backwards from once you have done that several times. Again, still life is one of the most cooperative pieces of subject matter, and you learn to paint still life because you've got all this texture and so forth. Now, I should mention the lighting conditions that I've got, because I have a warm spotlight on this composition, and I suppose I could ideally have a north light, but this is acceptable as long as you have a good light on top of your subject, or on top of your painting or your canvas, so that you know what colors are actually going on your canvas. It really doesn't matter what color you're painting from. I've seen some very unusual lighting situations. In this case, an incandescent bulb that I've got there is a little bit warm, and so the composition will be a little warm. But if you know a little bit about vision and how things work, your eyes actually adjust under lighting conditions. You walk into a room that's lit with an incandescent bulb, and you will almost instantly, not too instantly, but your eyes will adjust so that you will see a fuller range of light. Okay, I'm still drawing here with this yellow ochre for a few moments until we get everything located. So we've done a sketch that's fairly simple. We haven't gotten into too much detail, and there is no point because this is all going to be obliterated eventually. So what I want to do right now is to get this covered with the approximate colors that the whole thing is going to be dealing with, you know, the colors that will be in the composition. The canvas will be covered with color and value that will give your eyes the ability to relate the color and value better once everything is put on there. So I'm going to just put on a bunch of color in the approximate locations. And I'm going to use a fairly big brush. No point in being dainty about it to begin with because we're just getting things located. Any detail we do at this point will just get obliterated. Once we've got the lock-in established and then color on there, then the only thing left to do is to model, and then you can get into detail. A color that is a dark, sort of a darker version of the mid-tone, what I'm going to be working against. In reality, I want the exact color, but I like, of course, I think painting just works better if you start from darks and work up to the lights. Scumbling works better. Everything seems to work better if you come from the darks into the lights. But you don't want a color that is a lie. You want exactly the color, maybe just a slight bit darker than reality, and then you want an approximation of what's up there, and then you can adjust the lights and the darks. It makes painting faster. What you want to do in this case is to keep the intensity of the color, because as you come up in value, you have oranges and reds and yellows. If you take burnt sienna and put white in it, it will immediately kill the intensity of the color. So you want to be very judicious about the use of white. White is a dangerous color. It's something that you have to use, of course, but you've got to be careful about it, just exactly how you're going to use it. Now, in a few minutes, we'll have a bunch of students coming into this studio, which will be great. Some of them may ask some questions, which will be fine also. And some of them may like to watch all this kind of stuff go on. I do paint occasionally, but sometimes students want to see me in the process of this kind of stuff. Of course, the block in and this lay-in of color goes the fastest. But one of the most interesting things to know is how to work in detail with all this stuff. All right, those shucks up there, I see them certainly in the red-brown color, and they cut this reddish ochre, and so my ochres and siennas and burnt sienna and all that. I think I'll put in some light colors to begin with. This is yellow ochre with turpentine. Spread this around in the lighter areas. And then I will go for a little bit of burnt sienna in there, again for this reddish brown color. That seems to be so far predominant. And strangely enough, you've got some lizard crimson in some of this color way up there on the right, because that's some of that Indian corn shucks that actually seems to draw that color from the shucks. The corn.
begin with here, just to get this thing covered as quickly as possible, because you don't need to spend a great deal of time. The stuff that will take the most time on this, these smaller forms will not take all that much time, but the corn, obviously, if I get in there and stop and put highlights on the kernels in a row, or if I get into the shucks and do that stuff kind of like it is. If I want that kind of realism, then it's going to get a little bit later. So we'll just make a small section of this and that. And, you know, as I get older and realize that time is not perhaps on my side, I don't want to spend a lifetime on every painting that I do. So, you know, it's needless to spend a great deal of time. So you really want to figure out how to get something on there quickly and get it done. I like this little blue accent back here because certainly it is a complement of the warm colors that are in the painting. And I'm leaving the edges of that bowl because they're an ochre color like this pot color. And you'll notice this pot is much darker than what's going to be finally with that composition. My opinion, because I'm going to bring up the values, and that gives me some place to go. If you get too light to begin with, then you have to go dark, and it's so much easier to go light on top of dark forms. So I'm going somewhat dark, and then we're going to build form out of the darkness here. But you can't get the illusion of light without the illusion of shadow. So you've got to put in the shadows, and then you can create an effect of light. You just can't do it. If you don't have the darks in there, you're lost. And so I find a lot of students will get, they'll cover the canvas, and then they have no place to go. They don't want to go dark. I'll tell you the reason it's hard to go dark is it's tough to go dark on top of the light. Once you put light paint on a canvas, you can never get back to the full intensity and the depth of the dark if you're painting on something that's already light. It just doesn't work. I'm going to throw in this gourd back in the background with some orange. That may be a little strange, but I want the color and the intensity, and then I'm going to bring up the values later. Now that's the major color, and we'll get some intense colors on top of that. As a matter of fact, I might even do some of that right now. Sort of a note as to what's going to happen on it. But in the background, throwing a little ultramarine blue. Make sure that's the right color before I put it on. Throwing a little bit of ultramarine blue, and it gives you this ochre brown color. Now again, you can mix yellow ochre simply by using orange and ultramarine blue together. Go a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper orange, and some ochre. this piece of squash in the foreground. Very intense orange on the front end of this squash. And when you get into the shadow, you go to the opposite end of the color wheel to neutralize. And I think I'll probably hit some reds because there's some bright reflected lights into the shadows.
Is that cat orange?
This is just pure cat orange, right? And it's a deeper version of cat orange. Again, brand names will vary the orange choice away because having too much of the turpentine on the rag, it might get a little noxious smelling. So, let's see, the color for the back end, I'm gonna go for a little burnt sienna, a little bit of candle light.